Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Shri Radha Radhanath ki jai, Shri Giriraj Govardhan ki jai, Shri Gaura Hari ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naranchaivam Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiret Shunvata Swagata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtaneha Rudiyantasto Hi Avatrani Vidunoti Suritsatam Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shlokar Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Hare Krishna. We are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 25, The Characteristics of King Puranjana, Text 11. So anveshamana sharanam Babrama prithvim prabhuhu Nanurupam yada vindat Adbhutsa vimanaiva Sonvishamana sharanam Babrama prithvim prabhuhu Nanurupam yada vindat Adbhutsa vimanaiva Sonvishamana sharanam Babrama prithvim prabhuhu Nanurupam yada vindat Adbhutsa vimanaiva Sonvishamana sharanam Babrama prithvim prabhuhu Nanurupam yada vindat Adbhutsa vimanaiva Sonvishamana sharanam Babrama prithvim prabhuhu Nanurupam yada vindat Adbhutsa vimanaiva Sonvishamana sharanam Babrama prithvim prabhuhu Nanurupam yada vindat Adbhutsa vimanaiva Sonvishamana sharanam Babrama prithvim prabhuhu Nanurupam yada vindat Adbhutsa vimanaiva. Saha, that King Puranjana, Anveshamana, searching after, Sharanam, shelter, Babrama, traveled over, Prithivim, the whole planet Earth, Prabhu, to become an independent master, Na, never, Anurupam, to his liking, Yada, when, Avindat, he could find, Abhut, became, Sa, he, Vimana, morose, Iva, like. Translation. King Puranjana began to search for a suitable place to live, and thus he traveled all over the world. Even after a great deal of traveling, he could not find a place just to his liking. Finally, he became morose and disappointed. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The travelings of Puranjana are similar to the travelings of the modern hippies. Generally, hippies are sons of great fathers and great families. It is not that they are always poor, but some way or another they abandon the shelter of their rich fathers and travel all over the world. As stated in this verse, the living entity wants to become a Prabhu or master. The word Prabhu means master, but actually the living entity is not a master. He is the eternal servant of God. When the living entity abandons the shelter of God, Krishna, and tries to become a Prabhu independently, he travels all over creation. There are 8,400,000 species of life, and millions and trillions of planets within the creation. The living entity wanders throughout these various types of bodies and throughout different planets, and thus he is like King Puranjana, who traveled all over the world looking for a suitable place to live. Sri Narottam Das Thakur has sung Karma Kanda Jnana Kanda Kevala Vishera Bhanda. The path of Karma Kanda, fruit of activities, and the path of Jnana Kanda, speculation, are just like strong pots of poison. Amrita Balya Yeba Kaya Nana Yoni Sada Pire. A person who mistakes this poison to be nectar and drinks it travels in different species of life. Kadarya Bhakshana Kare, and according to his body, he eats all types of abominable things. For instance, when the living entity is in the body of a hog, he eats stool. When the living entity is in the body of a crow, he eats all kinds of refuse, even pus and mucus, and enjoys it. Thus Narottam Das Thakur points out that the living entity travels in different types of bodies and eats all kinds of abominable things. When he does not become ultimately happy, he becomes morose or takes to the ways of hippies. Thus in this verse it is said, Na Anurupam, that the king could never find a suitable place for his purpose. This is because in any form of life and on any planet in the material world, the living entity cannot be happy because everything in the material world is unsuitable for the spirit soul. As stated in this verse, the living entity independently wants to become a Prabhu. But as soon as he gives up this idea and becomes a servant of God, Krishna, his happiness immediately begins. Therefore, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur sings, Miche Mayara Vase Yacha Beshe Kacha Habu Dubu Hai. My dear living entity, why are you being carried away by the waves of Maya? As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 18.61, Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Hridesher Junatishtati Brahmayan Sarva Bhuyanti Yantra Rudhanti Mayaya. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities, who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. The living entity is carried in the machine of the body through so many species of life on so many planets. Therefore, Bhaktivinoda Thakur asked the living entity why he is being carried away in these bodily machines to be placed in so many different circumstances. He advises that one surmount the waves of Maya by surrendering unto Krishna. Jivera Krishna Dasa e Vishwasa Karle ta ara dukha nai. As soon as we confront Krishna, Krishna advises, Sarva dharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam braja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma suchaha. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reaction. Do not fear. Bhagavad Gita 18.66. Thus we are immediately relieved from traveling from one body to another and from one planet to another. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagavan Jiva. Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 19.151. If while traveling, a living entity becomes fortunate enough to become blessed by the association of devotees and to come to Krishna consciousness, his real life actually begins. This Krishna consciousness movement is giving all wandering living entities a chance to take to the shelter of Krishna and thus become happy. In this verse, the words Vimana Iva are very significant. In this material world, even the great King of Heaven is also full of anxiety. If even Lord Brahma is full of anxiety, what of these ordinary living entities who are working within this planet? Bhagavad Gita 8:16 confirms, Abrahma Bhuvana Loka Punar Avarnito Arjuna. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery wherein repeated birth and death take place. In the material world, a living entity is never satisfied. Even in the position of Brahma or in the position of Indra or Chandra, one is full of anxiety, simply because he has accepted this material world as a place of happiness. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunivari Pascha Deshatarine Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyaivacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Before I begin, I ask the blessings of all of the Vaishnavas assembled today and that are listening in. May I say something on this verse, which is in line with Srila Prabhupada's teachings and pleasing to the hearts and ears of all of the devotees. Hare Krishna. So we are continuing, or we're just beginning actually, the story of King Puranjana. It's described in the previous verses that this is an allegory. Even though Narada is saying in the previous verses to King Barhisat, let me tell you of a history of a king named Puranjana. It's described that this is an allegory which Narada is using. So I was listening to a class by Hari Parshad Prabhu, and he was saying that I think the Sanskrit word for allegory is parokshaha, which means that which is not available to the senses. So it's not that the history of King Puranjana was actually seen by anyone with their eyes, perceived by their senses in that way. It didn't actually happen in history. And the opposite to that is pratyaksha, that which has happened in front of the eyes, like, the story of King Barhisat. And this happened actually in history. So Narada is using this figure of speech to teach King Barhisat spiritual knowledge. And it's actually a very wonderful example of Narada using an indirect form of speech in service to the Lord. So it's an example for us in our endeavor to spread Krishna consciousness, of how you can use all of these different things directly or indirectly in service. And Prabhu was also just emphasizing the understanding of the word Puranjana itself, as we've covered in the previous classes, that Puranjana is an allegory for us, the living entity. I think maybe it was the previous purport or the one before that, Prabhupada is also emphasizing how Puranjana translates to living entity, Purajana. And there's another example, Puram Janayati is given, that he who continuously generates a new material body, life after life, new body one after another, and you just keep generating new bodies like that, Puram Janayati, the living entity. So we're beginning to embark on this journey of learning about Maharaj Puranjana and how he is Today's verse is describing how he is traveling all over the world, searching for a suitable place to live. And he traveled, and after a great deal of traveling, he could not find a single place just to his liking. And eventually, his journey ends in moroseness and disappointment. And it's not surprising that, Maharaj Puranjana is searching for a place to settle down and find shelter and be happy. This is the nature of the living entity. We all want to become happy. It's one of our, the living entity is Satchit Ananda, eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. So it's part of our nature to search for this happiness, for this belonging somewhere. But as Prabhupada is saying in the purport, it's not possible to find that in the material realm, right? Due to the bodily conception of life, the transmigration from one body to another, the temporary nature of the material realm. We won't find the happiness, the shelter we are looking for here. And if we remember, the chapter begins, Narada comes to King Barhisat, and he's describing, the nature of people who are engaged in a so-called dutiful life, that are living according to the rules and regulations of, Vedic scripture, engaged in karmakanda activities. But how, even at the end of that dutiful life, they bind themselves to their activities, so they take birth again and again and again. That even though they supposedly have done externally what they should be doing, but they're just binding themselves and creating so many reactions. So Narada is telling, in one sense, that yes, King Barhisat, you have good intentions with what you are doing, but because behind that there is the desire, knowingly or unknowingly, to enjoy in the material world, you are binding yourself and not doing yourself any good in the long run. Because ultimately, we have forgotten our original position, that we are not able to enjoy independently. Prabhupada is describing how the living entity is traveling all through the universe because they want to enjoy independently. They want to become Prabhu or Master, but that is not possible for us. And we come to this material world to try and find that, and search and search and search. But what actually happens is we don't find our independence. We become more and more absorbed in material energy and become lost in the temporary, in a sense. And the purpose, actually, we forget, of at least the human form of life, is to understand that we can never be happy independently or separate from Krishna. Because being here is not very pleasurable. In the long run, it's not pleasurable, and actually in the short run, it's not pleasurable either. Just in our day-to-day lives, we run into so many obstacles in our, strive for happiness and our purpose. And we were increasingly frustrated and full of anxiety, just trying to make ends meet every single day. So that in itself would tell you. And Prabhupada gives the example from Narottam Das Thakur, that this constant transmigration from one body to another and accepting this as, what it really is simply drinking poison. You are just knowingly drinking poison by going and carrying on in this way. But still, we carry on looking for shelter, for sharanam. Srila Sridhar Swami, in his commentary on this verse, explains that sharanam means that the living entity is actually looking for a suitable body, but what they're just looking for is a body to engage in material happiness. All over the universe, they're searching for this suitable body to find happiness in. But all they meet is frustration and eventually ending in moroseness. So we can see, and Prabhupada is saying, the verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Brahmanda Bhagyate, Kona Bhagavan, that we're traveling throughout the whole universe. So we can see the living entities, they're great travelers. They don't need passports, as we do. They just through their activity, you can get a new body, a new body, a new body. Not just a new body, you can go to a different planet, a different planet, a different planet, just like that, based on activity. It's quite amazing, and it's quite scary, also, if you think about it, right? But ultimately, because we are in the material realm, which is a temporary space, and it's not meant, actually, for us to live in eternally, because here everything is imperfect in the material world. So as much as we want to find our independence, our space, and our shelter, because ultimately it is only Krishna alone who is the controller and the master of everything, any endeavor we make separate from him will ultimately end in disappointment. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath ki jai, Shri Giriraj Govardhan ki jai, Shri Gaura Hari ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So we can continue to try, life after life, planet after planet, as much as we want to try. If we think the outcome will be different, we have, as the living entity, that minute independence of choice. So we can continue trying as much as we want, but Prabhupada is saying ultimately there is no satisfaction and there is no happiness to be found in the material world separate from Krishna. And the only way to come out of this is by good fortune. If we come into the association of the devotees, if we have that spiritual awakening, if we return to our original position that is part and parcel of Krishna, and engage in service to him, and take shelter of the devotees, that is, Prabhupada is saying, when true happiness actually begins from the spiritual platform. Otherwise, ultimately, as the verse is saying, vimana iva, all we will find is moroseness and disappointment. And it's not just that, if you think about it, moroseness and disappointment, it's not just sadness, you can be sad about something, but then you get over it. But moroseness and disappointment is a lot more heavier than sadness, It's in one sense, it's reaching a point of you're being disillusioned with your experiences in life, in your search for shelter, for happiness, like that. This moroseness, but what we actually should also find, because I was thinking then, well, if all you're going to find is moroseness and disappointment and unhappiness wherever you look, then what's the point of anything? It's quite heavy in that sense. It doesn't seem like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, in one sense. Because even in spiritual life, you practice, hopefully, very sincerely, according to your intention, for many, many years, but you may feel like you're still not where you should be. You're still not finding happiness. You still don't get along. You still don't find shelter in that sense. So even in spiritual circles, sometimes you don't find happiness all of the time. But yes, it's because we're still in the material world. We are still subject to the modes of material nature in that way. So no matter where we go, I was thinking, it's quite, if I can say, sobering to find that no matter where I go, the issues will still be the same, in one sense. And Prabhupada gives the example of the hippies as well, that they abandoned the shelter of their rich parents to travel all over the world, looking for happiness, looking for something else. And we can compare that again to the journey of the living entity, how we have abandoned Krishna in that sense, to travel all over the world to find happiness independently. And not just through one body, through millions of bodies, but ultimately, similar to the hippies, the living entity again finds just moroseness and disappointment in that way. But what Narada is actually trying to share with King Barahisat is that, yes, you are doing your duty and what you are doing very sincerely, in one sense, but you're applying your sincerity in the wrong place. Because in the material world, it's a constantly changing environment and a changing situation. The living entity is constantly changing their body and their environment through their karma. So there's no consistency. And instead, Prabhupada concludes the purport by then saying, that from the highest living entity in the material world, from Brahma to Indra to Chandra, all the way down, all they find is anxiety in all positions. So imagine, you can do all of the pious activities in the world and you can become Brahma, but still all you'll have is anxiety. And it's a lot worse because, you'll have more than one head of anxiety. At least we just have one head, and it gives us so much of anxiety and problems. Imagine being Brahma with 4 heads. How much anxiety that will give you, right? Again, so then no space is truly suitable for the living entity because it is separate from Krishna, right? So if we can see that the cause of our problems is leaving the shelter of Krishna and our search to become independent, then shouldn't then obviously the solution be taking shelter in that sense, but not just taking any shelter, because we've been trying that. Shelter of different bodies, of different relationships, of different environments, and it's still not working. The solution, as Prabhupada is saying, is taking spiritual shelter. And he quotes the verse from the Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dharman Parityaja, where Krishna is saying, just abandon all varieties of religion and simply take shelter of me, and I will protect you. Please do not fear, right? So we can see that Krishna, even though, Prabhupada in one sense is being very heavy and pointing out the root cause of all our problems, he's not just leaving us with a lap full of problems. He gives us a solution as well. That because you have, given up your real shelter, this has caused you so much anxiety. So take shelter, but take shelter of the correct situation, of the situation that you are actually coming from as part and parcel of Krishna. Because as Prabhupada is saying, our true good fortune will arise when we are lucky to come into contact with the devotees and reawaken that spiritual life. But it is a struggle, even for those of us who are practitioners of bhakti. It's not easy, even though we say, the process is very simple in one sense. Simple doesn't necessarily mean easy, because the material energy is very resourceful in her own way. She can say, why would you just want to work in America? Sometimes in the world we feel like if we work in a different country, we'll be more successful and more happy because materially it's more stable, there's more opportunity, this and that. But she can say, why do you just want to work in a different country? I can help you work on a different planet, in a different body. Why the same body, right? So yes, the material nature is very powerful, but she's doing what she's supposed to do, purifying us, teaching us in that way. But us as the living entity, if we very sincerely desire to be situated in reality, the ultimate spiritual reality, then that is also a very powerful desire that we have. Sincerity in spiritual practice is a very, very powerful thing. We don't often think about that, or we underestimate sincerity. Krishna is known as Bhavagrahi Janardana. He sees the intention behind everything that we do. So Krishna sees the sincerity with which we approach him in that way. And if he finds sincerity, why will he not back that up for us, right? As much as the material nature is also backed up by Krishna, because she is doing what she needs to do, Krishna will back up the sincere spiritual practitioner, because he can see what is truly in our heart in that way. There's a, I don't know if it's a saying or if it's an understanding, like that if you swim, if you're learning how to swim, and you're swimming against the current, you become a very good swimmer, because that resistance builds up your strength. and your endurance in that way. And sometimes, yes, the better you become, the stronger the current is, but it's building you up in your endurance and your strength to become better at what it is you're doing. So even as devotees, we find that, yes, we come to the spiritual platform and we begin our spiritual practice. And in the beginning, you find so much of relief, so much of shelter, so much of happiness. And then once you get into it slowly, challenges again start coming up one after another. Sometimes we become complacent because we've been practicing for so long. So, we become familiar as well. But we have to understand that, yes, even though we have the spiritual practice of bhakti, we're still in a material body. We're still in the material world. We're still surrounded by the material energy, the three modes of material nature. And yes, sometimes it's felt even more heavily by someone who is spiritually orientated, because now they are actively trying to get out of the situation. So we will be tested in that way. That do you really want to get out of the situation and go back to the spiritual realm? But the Bhagavad Gita also emphasizes that through the spiritual practice and through our sincerity, once you are liberated through the process of devotional service, you achieve that place from which, you cannot be removed, or there is no more movement in the sense. You're moving throughout the whole material energy, but once you are liberated in the spiritual platform, you come to that place where you cannot be. Once you go back to Krishna, Prabhupada would say, then there's no more fall down. Or as he would say, there's no more coming down, when you're chanting. So you go to that place from which there is no more movement, as opposed to a distance where we are constantly moving throughout the whole of the material creation, where there is no more material desire, and the only desire that we have is to serve Krishna as part and parcel of him. We are then fixed in our original spiritual position. And the word fixed gives the implication, obviously, that it cannot be changed in that sense. And Srila Prabhupada would often emphasize that in this material world, no amount of material adjustment will make things better. Srila Prabhupada was once on a morning walk in San Francisco. I think it was in 1967, and he's speaking to his disciples, and he's saying that the other day the radio man was asking Swamiji how to adjust, and Prabhupada's response, there is no adjustment. You have to get out of the scene. There is no adjustment. So the radio man was not very happy by my response. If I would have bluffed him, oh, you do this, you do that, you do this humanitarian work, you spread education, you give foodstuff. No, there is no adjustment. The only adjustment is to quit this place. That is the function of this human form of life. You can get out of this show by Krishna consciousness. Krishna says that this is the abode of miseries, and that also temporary, because you can accept any miserable life. That is the spell of Maya. Just like this dog life. If somebody asks me, would you like to be dog? I can make you. Shall I agree? Why not? Because I know that it's a miserable life. But the dog is very satisfied by becoming a purchased slave, very much satisfied. The dog has no independence, always chained, always a servant, eternal servant of a particular man. He can do any harmful thing by the order of the master. He's so faithful. But still, his life is miserable because he's a dog. But he is satisfied. He thinks that, oh, it's a very nice life. This is called the covering power of Maya, or illusion. Anyone in the most miserable condition of life, he'll think, oh, I am very happy. Ask him, how are you? Oh, very nice, very nice. So there is no adjustment. A Krishna conscious person he knows, here, only adjustment is to live in Krishna consciousness. It's very interesting. So Prabhupada is saying that there is no material adjustment we can make to become happy. And if you think you're happy, then that is the power of Maya, or illusion. And Prabhupada then concludes by saying that the only single adjustment we should make is to live in Krishna consciousness, because only there will we find the happiness and the shelter that we are truly seeking. And it reminded me of, there's a part in the Bhagavatam, I'm not quite sure, I can't remember where, but Indra is cursed, as he often is many times, but he's cursed in this situation to become a pig, right? And he falls down, and he completely forgets that he was the king of heaven, and all he understands is that he's a pig, and he has a wife, and he has babies, and he lives in the mud, and he eats stool, and it's Brahma that comes down to him and tries to say, like, don't you remember, you were Indra, the king of heaven, but he has absolutely no recollection. He's just a pig in that way. And also with ourselves, we don't know where we're coming from, what we've been through, what impressions we're carrying in our consciousness. But the only adjustment, now that we're at the human form of life and we have the capacity and the consciousness, the only adjustment we should be making is to live in Krishna consciousness with sincerity, because it's only there where we will find happiness. Because as Krishna is saying in the Bhagavad Gita, and as Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing at the end of the purport as the solution, sarva dharman parityaja, that we should surrender and abandon everything else, because there we will find, Krishna literally says, I will give you shelter, do not fear, in that sense. So yes, there's much disappointment, much moroseness to be found in the material world. But for us, we have the capacity to use that moroseness and disappointment as a stepping stone and as a doorway to our spiritual awakening, in that sense. Because it's not wrong to want shelter. It's not wrong to want happiness. It's not wrong to want a space to belong. It's part of our innate nature to desire all of these things. And yes, that is why, for example, we have the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. We have these temples. Prabhupada would often say that the temples are embassies for the spiritual world, in that sense. Yes, it's still hard, even in the temple. There are many challenges we find, because yes, we're still in the material world. The devotees are still to different capacities under the modes of material nature. In that sense, we're still working through so much of karma, in that sense. But we have come to the space of a spiritual embassy. And think about it, if we can serve here with all of the challenges, with all of the limitations that the material realm still provides, if we can still do our best to serve with sincerity, imagine when we reach the spiritual world, imagine what we'll do with all of the freedom. I was thinking about it, like what I would do with all of that freedom. And like recently, one of my favorite things is to cook in the sun, right? And there's always the problem of the budget. There's never enough money for the amazing feast that you want to cook. And I'm already thinking, okay, I found something I want to make next Sunday feast. But I can just see Mother Sukumari's face saying, Gaura, there's no money, Gaura. It's too expensive, Gaura, adjust or something like that. And I think the first thing I'll ever do in the spiritual world is cook as much as I want for the devotees without the botheration of a budget, right? So just think, if we can still do so much in our material service here with all of the challenges, what awaits us in the spiritual world with Krishna, when we're reunited? And just to conclude, still there is hope to be found, right, in the material world through our practice. And just jumping back to the 21st chapter, when, what was the 21st chapter? The instructions of King Prithu that he was sharing, he actually gives, in the text 44, he gives a formula for finding opulence in the world. And he just says that we should develop Brahmanical qualities, We should develop Brahmanical qualities. We should have gratitude for all of the experiences we have. We should develop our good behavior through our Brahmanical qualities, and we should take guidance from experienced saintly persons. And if we have all of this, we will find opulence wherever we are in that space. So that's something we can at least work to in the material realm. And we can use to supplement our spiritual practice. Because ultimately, as Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing, we'll only find that happiness under the shelter of Krishna and in the guidance of the Vaishnavas. In that way, we'll find relief, we'll find shelter, we'll find belonging. All of the things that we are yearning for is to be found in Krishna. And just to conclude, Srila Prabhupada was once asked in an interview, what do you feel when you chant Hare Krishna? And Srila Prabhupada could have said any number of things, that I see Krishna in front of me, I feel liberated, I feel ecstatic, like any of these kind of esoteric answers. But Srila Prabhupada, his reply was that I feel no fear. When I chant Hare Krishna, I feel no fear. And as Krishna is saying, Sarva Dharman Parityajya, and the conclusion of that translation is that do not fear. When you take shelter, I will take care of you, I will protect you, do not fear. So our spiritual practice and our chanting should lead us to the space of do not fear. Because there's only anxiety to be found, but in our practice, we should become relieved of fear. I will end there. Is there any correction, comment, anything else? Question? No? Okay. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Premanande, Hari Hari Bol.